I have often said that the true testament to a literary critic's ability to flex his or her muscles is in what it is they can analyze and come out with something that is really sort of about the human experience from. So, for example, you can read Shakespeare, and even the dullest among us can say that's literature. But a real sort of uh, literary behemoth, someone like Harold Bloom, could read the back of a bag of airplane peanuts and tell you something about the human experience. Now, I'm not saying that I have anything special to offer, but today's short story is somewhere in the middle there, where if you do read it as anecdotal, if you do read it as sort of a throwaway, if you do read it as just a cute short story, you can just read the back of a bag of peanuts. But if you are willing to look deeper, as with, I would contend, all of the Shirley Jackson that I've read, there's something real there. A very interesting test of a writer is kind of the opposite. If a writer can make something feel as basically dispensable as a bag of peanuts, can make it feel that way, but really plant some actual humanity inside of it, there's something special with that writer. Shirley Jackson is just such a writer. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for another short story discussion, which will appear, of course, in two playlists, on the channel. Number one being the short story discussion playlist, a playlist now approaching 125-ish videos strong, and number two, a short story by short story read-along of Let Me Tell You by Shirley Jackson, the most recent Shirley Jackson, I think, that we have access to. This video will have three separate sections: a So What Happened recap of the short story, a literary criticism section where we talk about all of the literary goings-on in this short story, and number three, a writer's corner portion where we talk about the things we can take from this short story as writers ourselves. So, what happened? Well, Mr. Shapiro is on his way home years before Ben, so we don't have any reason to believe he appears in the short story. Mr. Shapiro, goes up the steps to his house, and the door is already open. So he walks in and calls out to his wife in the kitchen. When will dinner be ready? The old American dream, right? You walk home from work, you get to the house, and dinner is on the table for you. Soon, she says. So he sits down in his chair. Something is off, something is weird, something is not quite right. So he talks to his kid a little bit, and that goes okay. But something is off, something is weird, something is not quite right. And we have this in Shirley Jackson a lot, right? So we're kind of, if you're familiar with Shirley Jackson, you're kind of already in the mindset that something might be strange. His wife says dinner is ready, so he goes, washes his hands, and she says, well, maybe someday you'll wash your hands before dinner's ready. And he goes in and sits at the table, and he recognizes the soup. Didn't we have tomato soup last night? Well, it turns out what has happened here, Mr. Shapiro is at the wrong house, so he goes home. Funny, right? Funny, haha. This is not really longer than a joke, right? This could be a joke. You could tell this at the cooler at work. But there's something way stranger underneath the surface here, and what this short story suggests. The human condition inside this short story. The number one thing that I want to talk about is the idea of thrownness, Geworfenheit, from German, is a philosophical term coined by Martin Heidegger in Being and Time in 1927. It describes the idea that human beings are thrown into existence without their consent in a world they didn't choose, under conditions beyond their control. This idea of thrownness is one that is very compelling to me. Often, when the idea of thrownness comes into discussion, it is because we don't choose where we are. We're born into a world. Some of us are born into countries at war. We don't choose that. Some of us are born into the Pax Romana, a period of peace and profit and probably indulgence. We don't choose that. Some of us are born in 1985, along with, the most handsome of us. We were born in 1985. Some of us are born in 1885, and we have much worse conditions. We don't choose that. Much like we feel at the onset of every day, we have been thrown into this planet. Some of our conditions we do not choose. Some of them we have worked to create or not worked and still created. This short story reeks of thrownness. Mr. Shapiro is simply existing within his own life. He is so blind to the things around him, having been thrown into the world, that he doesn't even recognize when he's going into the wrong house. The world around him is so foreign to him, living in his own head, that he can end up with the wrong family, and it takes him a while to recognize it. Seems funny, seems ha-ha. How many times... So I live in an apartment complex. All of the outsides of these apartments are the same. One of my particular circumstances that I work overnights, so when I get home, it's dark. I can't tell you how many times I have had my head down, simply walking along the pavement outside, and started going up the steps to the wrong apartment. I don't get very far, the key doesn't fit, but yeah, that is a daily occurrence for people around the globe. Being so blinded to the things around them that things which look almost familiar can be recognized as the right thing, wrongly. I have diagnosed this is my staircase and started up, only to recognize I don't have a plant, right? I don't have... My stoop is decidedly less livable than many of my neighbors. This idea of thrownness, I mean, how many times have you been driving to work and sort of woken up, realized, I don't know how I got here. I am a mile away from where it is that I find gainful employ, and I have no idea how I took the right turns. I was not thinking when I was taking those turns. Did I stop at all the stoplights? Did I run over someone on the way to right here, right now? You can lie to me all you want and tell me that doesn't happen to you. I know that it does. Thrownness in the moments of life, very stark, brings you to ultimate conclusions. What if anything had happened along the way just wrong? You took one wrong turn, you're driving down the wrong road, you hit some old lady crossing the street, didn't recognize it, and just kept going. The mysteries of consciousness along the way. And maybe you have a fairly good life. How many of those decisions did you make, right? How many of those decisions did you execute perfectly? What if you hadn't had sleep the night before? What if you had the wrong thing for dinner and you had a rumbly tummy? Would you have made the same decision? The second thing to talk about here is this short story suggests the interchangeability / replaceability of our lives. And if it suggests the interchangeability of our lives, how you could trade momentarily life with your neighbor and not recognize it for a little while, is it your life that's replaceable and changeable? Or is it you? Is it you that could be knocked out of existence and replaced by someone that looks fairly like you, has kind of the same schedule as you, and no one would notice. Shirley Jackson's put that into a short story that feels, at the onset, possibly by the conclusion, like a joke. Feels like just an anecdote. In fact, feels so much like that, one of the last lines in the short story is Mr. Shapiro saying, "Boy, have I got a story for you," to his wife. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here on the literary criticism section of things is it's going to sound like I'm down talking Shirley Jackson or just comparing her under another writer. That's not it at all. If I were better at communicating this, perhaps it wouldn't feel that way or sound that way either, but I'm not. I'm thrown into the place that I am. Shirley Jackson was George Saunders before George Saunders. George Saunders hailed today, George Saunders possibly today, probably today, almost undoubtedly today, the most recognizable short story writer, predominantly short story writer of our time. Shirley Jackson, I won't say that she was minuscule. I won't suggest that at all, but she was not appreciated as she should have been and still isn't. And I would challenge you to tell me why George Saunders is a superior writer to Shirley Jackson. I don't think, and I'm a George Saunders fan. I don't think you could get there. I don't think you could convince me of that. And when you're comparing the two, George Saunders possibly better at putting into his writing characters that draw out a sense of emotionality, a sense of deep-seated sadness in the world. But Shirley Jackson, I don't think George Saunders has ever, maybe he will, I don't think George Saunders has ever written a story as with the ambiance of mystery and possibly the paranormal as Shirley Jackson would write, even in this short story. Even in this very short story that has little acclaim, right? I'm going to put this on YouTube. It won't get views because no one has read this short story. I shouldn't say it that way, but very few people have read this short story. Even in this, Shirley Jackson is able to plant a sort of deep-seated dread inside the human experience. So what can we take from this as writers? Well, one of the things that is great about horror, and I won't suggest that this is horror, but there's an element of horror in it for sure, the sort of body snatcher way that this short story unfolds. There's a great short story called Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? One of my favorite things in that short story is that there's this guy that shows up at this girl's house. And she recognizes him. She's seen him before. And I'm blanking on the writer. I apologize. I shouldn't, because she's published 1,000 things. She comes out with something new every 30 seconds. But I was not really planning on talking about this, so I cannot remember her name. The character, there's at least, I think, 2 videos on this channel about this short story. One of the things that she does is the character in the short story recognizes this guy, but every time he gets a little bit closer to her, he's different. She sees something different until he's almost an alien. The slow, unwinding horror of something that you were looking at changing appearance, but it's not changing appearance, you're just recognizing something, is very difficult to put into literature. The recognition after the fact is even harder to put into literature. There's a moment of that in here. Mr. Shapiro goes into the house and asks his child for a kiss. The child says no. We realize later that's not his child. But that moment is so fleeting that you don't think about it at first. You don't know it at first. Later, when thinking about this short story, recognizing that Mr. Shapiro walked into someone else's house and asked his neighbor's child for a kiss. That's kind of scary, right? But you don't see it at first. The last thing that I want to really emphasize with this short story for writers is just how smooth it is. How smooth this short story goes. There's not a moment to breathe. It's part of the ironic context of the story is that there's no time to recognize. This sounds like a joke. If you were to summarize this short story, you would expect a but at the end of it. But look what's in here. From this short story, we're talking about the idea of thrownness, a deep cut of 20th century philosophy, a deep cut from philosophy. We're talking about the ideas of interchangeability and replaceability of the human experience. If I get fired at work, they hire somebody else. Maybe they'll call him Adrian until they realize, oh, wait, that's not Adrian. He just works the same shift. He just takes the same lunch. We're talking about all of that in a short story that feels like a joke. We're talking about the deep injustice of the way that Shirley Jackson is remembered, the scale at which Shirley Jackson is remembered from this short story. How much of that can you put into your own writing, and how quickly does it unfold on the page? How seamlessly does it unfold on the page? Are you calling attention to it in your own writing, which is not the best way to do it? Or are you planting it in your short story in such a flawless fashion that someone really has to think about it in order to get there? Now, there is a little bit of stress there as a writer, especially as an unrecognized writer, especially as a nameless writer. Is someone going to get your manuscript and read it with this due credibility? No. But you have to have it in there for your short story to really make an impact. That is all I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature fans, other Shirley Jackson readers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I do on the channel. There is poetry every Monday. We are reading through Shirley Jackson now. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.